During dinner, Dad slammed his fork down. "You think you're better than us because you have money now." My sister sneered. "If you really cared about family, you'd lend us $32,000 so we don't lose the cabin." My brother laughed. "You'll give it to us like always." I leaned back, smiled, and said, "Not this time." Then I pulled out the paperwork that changed everything. I, 34M, sat at the mahogany table in my parents' dining room, watching the steam rise from the roast chicken in front of me, and wondered how many times I'd have to sit through this exact same performance before I finally snapped. The answer turned out to be 0 more times. My father's fork hit the ceramic plate with a sharp metallic clang that made my mother flinch. He leaned forward, his face red in that particular way that meant he'd already had 3 whiskeys before dinner, and told me I thought I was better than them now that I had money. The words weren't new. I'd heard variations of this speech since I was 16 and got my first real job bussing tables at the diner on Route 9. My sister sat across from me, twirling her wine glass, her lips curled in that smirk I'd grown to hate over 34 years of being her personal ATM. She said if I really cared about family, I'd lend them $32,000 so they wouldn't lose the cabin. The cabin. That rotting pile of wood and broken dreams 2 hours north that none of them had visited in 3 years, but suddenly couldn't live without. My brother, slouched in his chair like he was doing us all a favor by showing up, laughed, and said I'd give it to them like I always did. His certainty was almost admirable. Almost. I leaned back in my chair, the leather briefcase beside my feet suddenly feeling heavier than it had all day, and smiled. I told them not this time. The silence that followed was delicious. My mother's hand froze halfway to her mouth, a forkful of green beans suspended in the air. My sister's smirk faltered. My brother stopped laughing. My father's bloodshot eyes narrowed, trying to determine if I was joking, if this was some kind of negotiation tactic, if his golden goose was finally refusing to lay eggs. I reached down and pulled the manila folder from my briefcase, setting it on the table between the mashed potatoes and the gravy boat. I told them I'd brought something to show them. My father demanded to know what I was playing at. His voice had that dangerous edge, the one that used to make me scramble to apologize, to backtrack, to open my wallet. But I'd learned something in the years since I'd left this house and built my business from nothing. Fear only works if you let it. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, loan agreements, a detailed spreadsheet I'd been maintaining for 12 years. Every dollar I'd ever given them, every loan that was promised to be paid back, every emergency that somehow never got resolved. The total sat at the bottom in red ink, $147,000. My mother gasped. My sister went pale. My brother suddenly found his napkin fascinating. I told them I'd started keeping track after the 4th time my brother borrowed money for rent, and I saw him posting pictures from Vegas the next week. I explained that I'd documented everything, dates, amounts, the reasons they'd given me, the promises they'd made. I'd even included screenshots of social media posts that contradicted their supposed emergencies. My sister's Hawaii vacation right after borrowing $8,000 for emergency dental work. My father's new truck purchase 2 weeks after I'd covered property taxes. My brother's designer watch collection that appeared while he owed me $15,000. My father's face went from red to purple. He stood up so fast his chair tipped backward, clattering against the hardwood floor. He told me I was calling them liars, that I was accusing my own family of being thieves. His voice shook the chandelier. I stayed seated, kept my voice level, and said I wasn't accusing anyone of anything. I was simply stating facts. Numbers don't lie. I told them I'd been enabling them for over a decade, and I was done. The bank of me was closed, permanently. My sister recovered first, switching tactics like she always did. Her voice went soft, pleading. She reminded me about the cabin, about all the summers we'd spent there as kids, about Dad teaching us to fish off the dock, about Mom's blueberry pancakes on Sunday mornings. She said it was about preserving memories, keeping the family together. She actually had tears in her eyes. I'd give her credit, she was good. But I'd become immune to the performance. I asked her when she'd last been to the cabin. She blinked, mouth opening and closing. I answered for her. For years ago, for 6 hours, to take Instagram photos. I asked my brother the same question. He muttered something about being busy. Their last visit was 5 years ago when he'd thrown a party there without asking, left it trashed, and my parents had called me to pay for the cleanup. I told them the cabin wasn't about family memories. It was about having an asset they could leverage for sympathy and cash. And I was done playing along. My brother found his voice then, anger replacing his earlier smugness. He said I'd changed, that money had made me cold. He reminded me that family helps family, that blood is thicker than water. The irony of him lecturing me about family obligations while owing me over $40,000 apparently escaped him. I smiled at that and told him he was right. I had changed. I'd realized that family doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean sacrificing my future so they can maintain lifestyles they haven't earned. I'd worked 80-hour weeks to build my consulting firm. I'd missed holidays, relationships, and sleep to get where I was. And they treated my success like it was their personal checking account. My mother finally spoke, her voice small and wounded. She said I was breaking her heart, that she'd raised me better than this. She asked how I could be so cruel. That word, cruel, almost made me laugh. I asked her if it was cruel that I'd paid for my brother's third wedding while skipping my own vacation. If it was cruel that I'd covered my sister's car payments for 2 years while she spent her salary on designer bags. If it was cruel that I'd refinanced their house twice and never saw a single payment. I asked her if any of them had ever once asked how I was doing. If they'd ever cared whether I was struggling or stressed or needed support. The silence answered better than words could have. I continued, pulling out another document. I told them I'd gone to a lawyer 3 months ago when my sister first mentioned the cabin situation. I'd had them draft formal loan agreements for every dollar I'd given the family. Legally binding documents with repayment terms and interest rates well below market value. I told them I wasn't asking for the past. That money was a sunk cost, a lesson I'd paid for in full. But going forward, if they wanted financial help, it would be a real loan with real consequences. My father told me to get out. His voice was quiet this time, which was somehow worse than the yelling. He said if this was how I wanted to treat family, I wasn't welcome in his home. I stood up, collected my documents, and put them back in the briefcase. I told him that was his choice to make, but he should know I was the only one paying for this home. The mortgage payments I'd been making for 6 years, I had documentation for those too. The house was in my name as of 3 months ago, transferred as repayment for debt. My lawyer had handled it all, completely above board. The shock on their faces would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. My mother demanded to know what I was talking about. I explained calmly that when I'd refinanced their mortgage the last time, they'd signed papers they clearly hadn't read. The house had been underwater, the bank ready to foreclose. I'd bought it outright and had been letting them live there rent-free. But that arrangement could change. My sister accused me of tricking them, of stealing the family home. I reminded her that I'd saved the family home. Twice. And that every document had been signed by both parents with a lawyer present. I wasn't a thief. I was just done being their safety net without any appreciation. I walked toward the door, and my brother blocked my path. He was bigger than me, always had been, and he'd used that advantage our entire childhood. He told me I wasn't leaving until I fixed this, until I gave them the money for the cabin and signed the house back over. I looked up at him and asked what he planned to do. Hit me? I told him to go ahead, that I had my phone recording in my pocket, and I'd be happy to add assault charges to the pile of documentation I'd already compiled. His lawyer fees would be significantly more than $32,000. He stepped aside. At the door, I turned back. They were all frozen in their seats, looking smaller somehow than they had when I'd arrived. I told them I didn't hate them. I wasn't trying to hurt them. But I was exhausted from being the only one who gave while they only took. I said I'd be willing to have a relationship with them if they could learn to respect boundaries, but that would require them doing some serious self-reflection. My father said he'd never forgive me for this. I told him I'd learned to live with a lot of things. His disappointment was just one more. I walked out into the October evening, the air crisp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of that dining room. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my car, the adrenaline finally catching up with me. I'd rehearsed that conversation 100 times, played out every possible response. But the reality had been both easier and harder than I'd imagined. I drove to my apartment downtown, the city lights blurring past the window, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, free. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since the dinner, and the fallout has been exactly what I expected and somehow worse. My phone blew up for the first 3 days, calls, texts, voicemails ranging from apologetic to threatening. My mother crying, begging me to reconsider. My sister alternating between fury and manipulation. My brother leaving messages that my lawyer advised me to save as evidence. My father sent exactly one text telling me I was dead to him. I blocked all their numbers after day 4. What I didn't expect was how quickly the extended family would get involved. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in 5 years called to tell me I was destroying the family. My aunt sent a long email about forgiveness and Christian values, conveniently forgetting she'd asked me for money last Christmas. My uncle left a voicemail saying I should be ashamed of myself for disrespecting my parents. I replied to exactly one of them, a cousin I'd actually been close with growing up. I sent her the full spreadsheet and asked if she'd be willing to give $147,000 to people who'd never paid her back, never thanked her, and only called when they needed something. She didn't respond. The gossip spread through the family like wildfire. I became the villain in everyone's story, the successful son who got too big for his britches, who forgot where he came from, who abandoned his family in their time of need. No one mentioned the decade of financial abuse. No one talked about the manipulation or the entitlement. I was just the bad guy who wouldn't share his money. Fine, I could live with that. What surprised me was the support I got from unexpected places. My assistant, who'd witnessed some of my family calls over the years, told me she was proud of me for finally setting boundaries. My therapist, who I'd started seeing 6 months ago, said this was a breakthrough moment. And an old college friend who I'd reconnected with recently told me she'd watched her brother go through something similar and wished he'd had my courage. The cabin went into foreclosure. My sister posted a long, dramatic Facebook status about losing precious family memories and how money changes people. She tagged me. I didn't respond, but several people who knew the real story commented with eye-opening questions about why she hadn't made the mortgage payments herself if it was so precious. She deleted the post within an hour. My parents hired a lawyer to challenge the house transfer. My lawyer assured me it was a waste of their money. Everything had been done legally, and they'd signed every document. Still, it meant more stress, more conflict, more proof that they couldn't accept responsibility for their own financial decisions. The most interesting development came from my brother. 2 days ago, he showed up at my office. My receptionist tried to turn him away, but I told her to let him in. I was curious. He sat across from my desk, looking uncomfortable in a way I'd never seen before. He was sober, which was rare for him after noon. He didn't demand anything. He didn't threaten. He just sat there for a long moment before saying he'd been doing some thinking. He told me he'd looked at his own finances for the first time in years and realized he was drowning. He'd built a lifestyle he couldn't afford, and he'd been using my money as a crutch so he didn't have to face reality. He said seeing the spreadsheet, seeing the actual numbers, had been a wake-up call. He'd always told himself he'd pay me back eventually, but eventually never came because he kept spending money he didn't have. I asked him what he wanted from me. He said nothing. He just wanted to apologize for taking advantage, for being an entitled ass, for treating me like a bank instead of a brother. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, and he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but he needed to say it. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to kick him out, to tell him it was too little, too late. But another part recognized something genuine in his voice that I hadn't heard in years. I told him apologies are meaningless without changed behavior. I said if he was serious about fixing his life, he needed to prove it through actions, not words. He nodded and asked if I'd be willing to recommend a financial counselor. Not to help him get money, just someone who could teach him how to budget, how to live within his means. I gave him a name. He thanked me and left. I don't know if it'll stick. He's disappointed me too many times to trust him immediately. But it was something. A crack in the wall of entitlement that had surrounded my family for as long as I could remember. My sister, predictably, went the opposite direction. She'd started a GoFundMe to save the cabin, telling a sob story about a heartless brother who'd abandoned his family. It raised $800 before someone who knew the real story commented with details about her spending habits and the money I'd already given her. She deleted that too. My parents remained radio silent after the initial barrage. I heard through the grapevine that my father was telling everyone I'd stolen their house. My mother was playing the victim, crying to anyone who'd listen about her ungrateful son. Neither of them had made any attempt at genuine conversation or self-reflection. The house situation was resolved when my lawyer sent them a formal letter. They could continue living there under a rental agreement with below-market rent, or they could move out and I'd sell the property. They had 30 days to decide. The rent I was charging would cover the mortgage, insurance, and property taxes, nothing more. I wasn't profiting, I was just done subsidizing their lifestyle while they vilified me. I didn't expect them to take the offer, but yesterday I received signed rental agreement papers through my lawyer. No accompanying letter, no apology, no acknowledgement of anything. Just signatures. It was something. Update 2. 3 months have passed since the dinner that changed everything, and life has settled into a strange new normal. The rental arrangement with my parents has been functioning smoothly. They pay on time, which I suspect is more about pride than responsibility, but I'll take it. We haven't spoken directly. All communication goes through my lawyer, which suits everyone just fine. My brother surprised me. He's been seeing the financial counselor I recommended, and according to his wife, who reached out to thank me, he's completely changed his approach to money. He got a second job, sold his luxury car for something practical, and they've been working through Dave Ramsey's program together. He sent me a check last month for $500 with a note saying it was the first installment on his debt. The note said he'd calculated that at $500 per month, it would take him 7 years to pay me back, but he was committed to doing it. I deposited the check, not because I needed the money, but because I knew refusing it would undermine what he was trying to accomplish. Progress, even slow progress, deserved acknowledgement. My sister has gone fully scorched earth. She's told anyone who'll listen that I'm a monster, that I stole our family home, that I'm the reason they lost the cabin. She's blocked me on all social media, which is honestly a relief. Her husband reached out once, asking if we could talk, but when I suggested he look at the financial records, he stopped responding. I suspect he didn't know the full extent of the money involved and didn't like what he discovered. The extended family has mostly divided into camps. Some believe my parents' version of events. Others have started asking uncomfortable questions about their own relationships with my parents and siblings. A few relatives have quietly reached out to apologize for jumping to conclusions. I've accepted the apologies, but kept my distance. Trust isn't rebuilt quickly. The most unexpected change has been in my own life. Without the constant financial drain and emotional manipulation, I've had space to breathe for the first time in years. I've been dating someone I met through a friend. Someone who knew nothing about my family's situation and liked me for who I was, not what I could provide. I've been traveling, taking weekends off, doing things I'd sacrificed while playing family ATM. I'd also done something I'd been considering for a while. I'd established a scholarship fund at my old high school for students from low-income families pursuing business degrees. I'd seeded it with $50,000, money I would have given my family without thinking twice just a year ago. Now it would help kids who actually wanted to work hard and build something for themselves. Last week, something happened that I'm still processing. My mother showed up at my office without warning. My receptionist buzzed me, sounding nervous, and I almost told her to send my mother away. But curiosity got the better of me. She looked older than I remembered, smaller. She sat in the same chair my brother had occupied months earlier and didn't speak for almost a minute. When she did, her voice was quiet. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking, that losing the cabin and nearly losing the house had forced her to confront some things she'd been avoiding. She told me my father refused to admit any fault, that he'd convinced himself I was the villain in this story and would probably never change his mind. But she'd started looking at bank statements, at credit card bills, at the patterns of their spending. She'd realized how much I'd been covering, how much they'd been taking for granted. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for anything. She just said she was sorry for enabling my father's drinking, for playing favorites with my siblings, for treating my success like it was owed to them instead of earned by me. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she needed me to know that she saw it now. She saw what they'd done. I told her I appreciated her coming. I asked her what had changed, what had finally broken through the denial. She said it was the rental agreement. Having to actually pay for the house, having to budget and make choices about spending, had shown her how much I'd been shielding them from reality. She'd had to get a part-time job for the first time in 30 years. It was humbling, she said, but necessary. I asked if my father knew she was here. She shook her head and said he'd forbidden her from contacting me. She'd come anyway, which was its own form of progress. My mother had always deferred to my father, always backed his decisions even when they were wrong. This was the first time I could remember her going against him for something that mattered. I told her I wasn't ready for a full relationship yet. The wounds were too fresh, the patterns too deep. But I'd be willing to have coffee once a month, neutral territory, just the two of us. No talk of money, No guilt trips, no expectations. Just two people trying to figure out if they could rebuild something from the ashes. She agreed immediately, tears in her eyes, and thanked me. As she left, she turned back and said one more thing. She told me she was proud of me, not for the money or the success, but for having the strength to stand up for myself when no one else would. It was the first time she'd ever said those words to me. The family dynamics remain complicated. My father and I are effectively estranged, and I've made peace with that. My sister has dug herself deeper into victimhood and denial. But my brother is slowly rebuilding his life. My mother is beginning to acknowledge reality, and I've reclaimed my own autonomy. The cabin was sold at auction. Some developer bought it, probably planning to tear it down and build something new. There's a metaphor in there somewhere about clearing away rotting foundations to build something better, but I'm too tired to pursue it. I don't regret what I did that night. I don't regret the paperwork, the confrontation, or the boundaries I've enforced. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living for myself instead of being consumed by others' endless needs and expectations. The interesting thing about setting boundaries is that it reveals who actually cares about you versus who just cares about what you can do for them. It's a painful lesson, especially when it involves family, but it's necessary. I still have moments of doubt, moments when the old guilt tries to creep back in. But then I look at my life now, the peace, the freedom, the relationships built on mutual respect instead of financial obligation, and I know I made the right choice. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people is stop enabling their dysfunction. Sometimes you have to let them hit bottom before they can climb back up. And sometimes, saving yourself means walking away from people who refuse to save themselves. I pulled out paperwork that changed everything, and it did, just not in the way my family expected. They thought it would be their salvation, another bailout, another rescue. Instead, it was my liberation. And I'd make the same choice again, every single time.